The silence that fell over Kingsley's, Atlanta's most exclusive restaurant, was so thick it seemed to have weight. The tension between Arthur Sinclair and his son, Leo, was a familiar, uncomfortable chill that always accompanied their rare public outings. Arthur, a man in his 50s whose suit cost more than the average car, checked his watch, not out of necessity,
is absolutely
but habit.
Unacceptable, sir.
He was
You
a
need
man
to
defined
leave.
by control,
Don't you dare
and this
speak to
dinner
me
was
that way.
already
I
slipping
own
from
this
his grasp.
establishment.
His 10-year-old son, Leo, sat opposite him, looking small and fragile in the oversized booth. Heavy metal braces encased his legs from the thigh down, a constant, gleaming reminder of the accident. Leo kept his eyes fixed on the folded linen napkin in his lap, visibly shrinking under the ambient pressure of the dining room. "Sit up, Leo," Arthur said, his voice low but sharp. It wasn't a request. It was a correction. Leo nodded, his shoulders hunching further before he forced them back. He knew the routine. Don't draw attention. Don't make noise. Don't be a problem. The setting itself was a performance of stifling perfection. Soft piano music drifted from an unseen corner, mixing with the quiet clinking of silver on porcelain. The patrons were the old guard of Atlanta wealth, hushed and polished, their conversations murmured. Into this silence stepped Grace Holloway. She was in her 30s, the restaurant's only black waitress, moving with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible to the clientele. She approached their table to pour water. Arthur didn't look at her. He was already speaking past her, ordering for his son. "He'll have the pasta. No sauce, just butter. And bring me actually just water for now." Grace simply nodded, her professionalism a smooth shield. But as she filled Leo's glass, her eyes met his. It was only for a second, a brief, warm acknowledgement. Leo, startled, looked up, then quickly looked away, but not before Grace noticed the spark of intelligence hiding behind the fear. Arthur's phone vibrated. He pulled it out, his expression darkening as he read the screen. He stood abruptly. "I have to take this." He walked toward the lobby, his voice already dropping into the sharp, commanding tone he used for business. Leo was alone at the table, surrounded by the murmur of strangers. The pianist began a new melody, something soft and slow. Leo watched Grace as she cleared a nearby table, her movements precise and calm. His leg began to shake beneath the table, the metal brace tapping a nervous rhythm against the floor. He watched her, this woman who had seen him. An impulse he couldn't name, couldn't control, suddenly gripped him. He pushed his chair back. The sound of his braces scraping against the polished floor was obscenely loud in the quiet room. He took one slow, painful step, then another, navigating the small space between tables. Grace, sensing movement, turned. Leo stood before her, his small hand trembling as he extended it. "Ma'am, would you dance?" Conversation ceased. Cutlery froze in midair. Dozens of eyes fixed on the small boy and the black waitress. Arthur Sinclair looks up from his phone, his face a mask of pure fury. "Sir, control your son." What a moment. The entire restaurant has frozen. Arthur is furious, and all Leo wanted was a moment of connection. If you're feeling the tension right now and find this story valuable, please comment with the number 8 below, just to let us know you're here and invested in what happens next. This is only the beginning. If you're not already part of our community, I truly recommend you subscribe to Black Brilliance and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss how Grace handles this impossible situation. Your support is what helps us continue to create and share these powerful stories that inform and inspire. Now, let's see what happens. "This is not a dance hall," the manager, Mr. Henderson, hissed, his sharp voice cutting the silence. He had materialized beside Arthur, his face pale with a mixture of anger and fear. He directed his glare not at the billionaire, but at Grace. "And our employees are not here to entertain children." Arthur's cold command. "Leo, sit down," echoed the manager's cruelty, reinforcing the wall of control around the boy. The words struck Leo harder than a physical blow. He visibly flinched, his small, outstretched hand trembling as he began to retract it in shame. His brief moment of courage was collapsing. Arthur was paralyzed, caught between the humiliation of the scene and the fury that his son had created it. He saw the other diners watching, their faces a mix of pity and judgment. But Grace remained perfectly still. Her gaze shifted calmly from the manager to the billionaire, and finally, settled on the boy. She saw only Leo. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I'm leaving. My shift is over." Without breaking eye contact with Leo, she reached behind her and untied her black apron. She calmly removed it and placed it on a nearby tray. Then, ignoring the manager's sputtered protests and the dozens of staring faces, she smiled gently at Leo and took his small, trembling hand in hers. "I can't dance in an apron," she said simply, as if this were the most normal request in the world. Arthur stood up abruptly. "What do you think you're doing?" Grace held his gaze, unintimidated. "I'm accepting an invitation, sir." Before Arthur or the manager could interfere, Leo took a hesitant step forward. His foot dragged painfully, the metal of his braces screeching faintly against the floor. But Grace didn't try to guide him. She didn't hurry him or try to support his weight. She simply adjusted her own pace to his, her hand a light, reassuring presence, not a controlling one. For 3 slow, awkward steps, Leo wasn't being helped, corrected, or managed. He was leading. Arthur watched, his anger faltering, replaced by a strange, sharp memory. His late wife, Elizabeth, dancing with a much smaller Leo in their living room, back before the accident. "It's not about perfection, Arthur," she had laughed. "It's about connection." He looked at his son's face. The terror and shame had vanished. In its place was a look of intense concentration, and beneath it, a tiny, fragile bloom of shy pride. It was the first time Arthur had seen his son truly smile in 2 years. Grace led Leo back to the table after only those few steps. She nodded to him formally, as if he were any other gentleman in the room. "Thank you for the dance," she said. As she turned to leave, Arthur stopped her. "Wait." His voice was different, rougher. The entire restaurant was still watching. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim, black wallet, and extracted a heavy card. He held it out to her. "My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The lobby of the Sinclair Tower was designed to make people feel small, all glass, steel, and cold marble reflecting the Atlanta skyline. It was a cathedral of commerce, and Grace Holloway, in her best and only blazer, felt its oppressive weight. She clutched her worn purse, feeling the same judgmental stares she felt at the restaurant, but here they were sharper, dressed in expensive suits. The receptionist had examined her with a clinical gaze, her surprise barely veiled. 18th floor. "Miss Price will see you," she'd said, her tone implying Grace was a delivery person gone astray. Now, in the sterile executive waiting room, Grace sat across from Miss Price, Arthur's assistant. Miss Price was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 40s, a perfect gatekeeper for a man like Sinclair. "He had you fired, didn't he?" Miss Price asked suddenly, her voice devoid of sympathy, holding a file. "From Kingsley's." Grace just looked at her. "It happens," Miss Price continued with a condescending sneer. "Powerful clients call and, well, employees who don't know their place." "And where exactly is that, Miss Price?" Grace asked, her voice quiet. Before the assistant could answer, her desk phone buzzed. "He'll see you now." Arthur's corner office was vast, half the floor, with a view that treated Atlanta as its personal property. He was standing by the window, a mask of studied control back on his face. "Miss Johnson and O. Holloway." "Grace Holloway." "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair that felt miles away. He made her wait in the calculated silence, a tactic she recognized instantly. It was designed to make nervous people talk too much. Grace waited. "Do you have a background?" he finally asked. "Excuse me. Education." "College," he clarified as if speaking to a child. "Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU," Grace said steadily. "Incomplete master's degree in special education." Something flashed across Arthur's face, surprise. He was momentarily thrown but recovered, moving to his desk. "I see. And you work as a waitress." "I work 3 jobs, Mr. Sinclair," she corrected. "The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and as a tutor." He nodded, processing this new information. He clearly hadn't expected this. "I have the best specialists in the country," he began, his voice shifting into transactional mode. "Physical therapists, neurologists. But what you did yesterday..." He paused, searching for the word. It was different. It was the first time I've seen him smile like that since the accident. He named a salary. It was 5 times what she could possibly make from all 3 of her jobs combined. You'll be his therapeutic companion. Whatever he needs. Grace stood up. No. Arthur looked genuinely shocked, a man unaccustomed to hearing that word. I beg your pardon? I don't work for people who try to buy solutions to emotional problems, Grace said calmly, her voice finding its strength. And I definitely don't work for people who see my color in my job before they see my competence. Your son doesn't need another expert paid to manage him. He needs space to lead. Grace pulled a worn, folded flyer from her purse and placed it on his massive, empty desk. The cheap paper looked defiant on the polished wood. Freedom Steps Community Program. Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you want to bring Leo, the first class is free. She leaves Arthur Sinclair alone in his vast office, speechless. Can we just pause for a moment on that scene? Grace just stood in a billionaire's tower, turned down 5 times her salary, and left him speechless with nothing but a flyer. That is the definition of dignity. If you are still watching and feeling the power of that moment, let us know you're here by commenting with the number 8 below. Stories like this, showing this level of character and quiet strength, are exactly why Black Brilliance exists. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Your support is what helps us continue to create content that doesn't just entertain, but truly inspires. Now, the big question. Will a man like Arthur Sinclair actually go to that community center? Let's keep going. The following Wednesday, Arthur Sinclair's black Bentley looked like a spaceship parked outside the worn-down community warehouse in East Atlanta. Arthur stared at the peeling paint of the Freedom Steps sign, clutching the cheap flyer Grace had given him, feeling completely out of his element. He had spent the last week furious, first at the waitress, then at himself. But Leo had asked every single day, "Are we going? Are we going to the dance place?" He killed the engine, the silence in the car suddenly heavier than the noise outside. "Leo, stay here. I'll check it first." "No." Leo, already unbuckling, said. She said we could come." Arthur sighed, defeated by this new, stubborn streak in his son. They got out. Inside, the warehouse was the polar opposite of Kingsley's restaurant. It was loud, vibrant, and filled with a chaotic energy. Handmade posters with phrases like "your rhythm," "your rules," decorated the walls. Colorful mats covered the floor, where a dozen children with various mobility devices, walkers, wheelchairs, crutches, and braces just like Leo's, were moving freely to a light beat. Leo froze, his eyes wide. He looked awed, excited, and terrified all at once. He watched a girl in a wheelchair spin precise, joyful circles. Grace, wearing simple sweats and a t-shirt with the program's logo, spotted them and walked over, her face professional and calm. "Mr. Sinclair." "Leo. Welcome." "It looks chaotic," Arthur muttered, his discomfort obvious. "It's structured," Grace replied evenly. "It's just not the structure you recognize." She turned to Leo. "Want to join in?" Leo looked at his father, who gave a stiff, hesitant nod. Leo slowly, cautiously, moved toward the other children. A woman, who looked like a slightly older version of Grace, brought Arthur a flimsy folding chair. "I'm Maya, Grace's sister," she said, smiling. "The first day is always the hardest. For the parents, anyway." Arthur merely nodded, perched awkwardly on the tiny chair. His attention was drawn to an older, distinguished-looking woman with elegant gray braids and a commanding presence, who was leaning on an ornate cane. She was observing the children, taking notes. She approached Arthur. "Mr. Sinclair." "I recognize the name," she said, her voice clear and academic. Arthur, assuming she meant his business reputation, gave a polite, dismissive nod. "Dr. Lena Caldwell," she introduced herself. "I recognize the name because you've rejected my research proposal 3 times in the last 2 years. Arthur was completely blindsided. I'm sorry, I don't." He thought this was just a community dance class, a charity case. Grace joined them, having settled Leo into the group. "Freedom Steps is a motor rehabilitation pilot program, Mr. Sinclair," she explained, her voice level. "It's based on the theory of movement autonomy and neuroplasticity. My co-author, Ms. Holloway, Dr. Caldwell added, gesturing to Grace, has groundbreaking theoretical work that your foundation dismissed as lacking traditional application. The penny dropped. The room seemed to tilt. Arthur stared at Grace, the waitress. The co-author. You knew who I was, he said, his voice flat. At the restaurant. I knew who you were when you canceled our meeting request 4 months ago without reading the proposal, Grace says, her voice steady. The dance? That was all Leo. But I recognized the opportunity to show you what you refused to see. You used my son. Arthur's voice was pure ice. You staged this whole thing. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and cold. He felt manipulated, his philanthropy weaponized against him. I gave you a chance to see the truth, Grace replied, her voice unflinching. What you do with it is your choice. But Arthur wasn't listening. He saw only the trap. A PR stunt, he spat, just as Maya led a group of people into the warehouse. A reporter he recognized from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and a local news camera crew entered. You brought me here on press day. We published our results today, Grace said, her voice rising slightly, matching his intensity. We invited the press to show them what's possible. You chose to come today, Mr. Sinclair. The reporter, sensing the tension, gestured for the cameraman to start filming. Arthur was cornered. The camera's a spotlight on his worst assumptions. He was about to unleash a torrent of legal threats when Maya suddenly cut the music. The sudden silence was absolute, heavier than the silence at Kingsley's. Every head in the room turned. Leo was in the center of the floor. He was oblivious to the adult drama, his face a mask of intense concentration. He had been watching the other children, mimicking their focus. Slowly, deliberately, he reached down and unhooked the main clasp on his right leg brace. Leo. Arthur started forward, his instinct to control, to fix, to stop kicking in. Grace put a firm hand on his arm. Wait. Watch him. Leo took a deep, shuddering breath. He was balancing only on his left leg, the unstrapped brace on his right hanging loose. He lifted his unsupported right foot. He wobbled, his small body shaking with the effort. He focused, his eyes locked on a spot on the far wall. Then, to the amazement of everyone in the room, especially his father, he took one complete, shaky, independent step. It was small. It was unstable. But it was entirely his. The children in the warehouse, understanding the magnitude of the achievement, erupted in cheers and applause. The cameras, which had been focused on Arthur, swung wildly, the flashes popping, capturing the miracle. Arthur Sinclair stood frozen, the angry words dead in his throat. He stared at his son, not as a problem to be managed, but as a complete person, and unshed tears glistened in his eyes. The reporter, realizing the connection, shoved a microphone in his face. Mr. Sinclair, that's your son. Is it true your foundation rejected this program 3 times? Cornered by the press, his failure about to be broadcast, Arthur looked past the cameras at his son, who was practicing the new step again, his face lit with a concentration Arthur had never seen. In that moment, the anger vanished, replaced by a profound clarity. He remembered the feeling in the restaurant, his late wife's voice. It's about connection, and the shy pride on Leo's face. He had been wrong. About everything. He ignored the reporter's sharp question. He turned, not to the camera, but to Grace and Dr. Caldwell. Then he smiled, a genuine, tired, and deeply human smile. He faced the cameras again. You know what's hardest for someone in my position, he said, his voice quieting the room. Admitting when we're wrong. A stunned silence filled the warehouse. The Sinclair Foundation, Arthur announced, his voice firm, is pleased to announce a commitment to fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years and to build a new, permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Caldwell and Ms. Holloway. Camera flashes exploded. Maya and Dr. Caldwell gasped. Grace simply watched him, her expression unreadable. On one condition, Arthur added, his gaze finding Grace's. That Ms. Holloway retains complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference. 1 year later, the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center was open. It was a building filled with light, adaptive spaces, and the sound of music. At the opening ceremony, Leo, now using only a light, modern cane on difficult days, was in the center of the main hall. He wasn't the subject of therapy. He was a youth spokesperson, helping a younger girl find her balance. Arthur watched from a distance. He was in a board meeting later that day, not at the head of the table, but as a participant. He was listening as Grace, now Dr. Holloway, having completed her master's, and Dr. Caldwell presented their latest data. He studied neuroplasticity articles at night now. Later, he and Grace stood watching Leo. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," Grace said quietly. "No," Arthur agreed, his eyes on his son. "But he still needs me to be around." Crucial difference. He turned to her, the billionaire father to the former waitress. "Thank you for teaching me to follow." A reporter approached them, the same one from the warehouse. "Mr. Sinclair, it's been an incredible year. What's been the biggest lesson you've learned on this journey?" Arthur Sinclair, the man who once controlled everything, looked at his son, then at Grace, then into the camera. That true leaders aren't those who guide, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way. In the end, the silence that was broken in the restaurant allowed a father to truly hear his son for the first time. Arthur and Grace's journey teaches us that when we look past the labels of billionaire or waitress, we often find the very lessons we need to learn. Like a quiet melody, a simple act of dignity has the power to change the entire composition of a life. If this story touched your heart, please share the warmth with others, and we welcome you to share your own reflections in the comments below. We are dedicated to finding these hidden moments of strength, so be sure to follow Black Brilliance for more stories that celebrate the profound power of seeing people for who they truly are.